Caleb Walker had been on the road since sunrise. His boots still held the scent of sawdust, his arms carried the ache of weeks spent milling wood by hand. After 3 seasons of planning, arguing with county permit offices, and battling early snow, his family's old lakeside cabin in Eagle Lake was finally going to get its long overdue rebuild. He had one goal: finish the deck before winter turned the trail into ice. As he backed his truck and trailer down the narrow gravel drive, the sun filtered through the pines like gold dust. Caleb had made this drive hundreds of times since he was a boy. His grandfather built this place. His father died here during a snowstorm, leaving him the deed and a stack of promises he hadn't yet fulfilled. This land wasn't just his, it was bloodbound. But today, something felt off. He glanced at his rear view and spotted a white Lexus sitting idle at the fork of the drive, just beyond the HOA's decorative wooden archway. At first he thought it was lost. Tourists always took wrong turns up the mountain, but as he unlatched the trailer and lifted the first log, the car door opened. Out stepped a woman in pressed khakis, pearls, and what looked like expensive gardening gloves. Her name was Karen Lancaster, though Caleb didn't know it yet. She carried herself like the property belonged to her, eyes scanning everything, mouth already forming her first complaint before she even cleared the brush. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice sharp, trained from years of board meetings and fundraisers. "You can't just dump logs here." Caleb wiped his brow and glanced at her, not bothering to hide his exhaustion. "Ma'am, I'm not dumping anything. This is my property." She marched closer, clipboard in hand, and lifted a printed page with a highlighted section near the top. "This is part of the Eagle Lake Mountain Preservation Zone. Remove, relocate, or modify any standing timber within the shared visual corridor." Caleb squinted. "You're pointing at a newsletter? Not a law." Karen frowned. "It's HOA policy." Caleb crossed his arms. "I didn't join your HOA. Karen's expression didn't change. She pointed behind him, where the stack of fresh cedar logs sat, tied and ready. "Then you're about to find out what happens to people who break the rules." Without another word, she reached into her belt bag and pulled out something metallic. That at first, Caleb thought it was a flashlight, but it wasn't. The Glock hung loosely in her hand, not pointed, but held with enough familiarity to make him take a step back. "Ma'am," Caleb said slowly, hands open in front of him, "you might want to put that away before you say something. You can't walk back." Karen kept her grip but raised the clipboard again. "I have authority here. You're not allowed to harvest these woods. The HOA is pursuing reforestation grants. That lumber belongs to the community now." Caleb looked, from the weapon to the clipboard, then to the old brass property marker, nailed into the pine beside him. It had his grandfather's initials and a burn mark left by a welding torch half a century ago. "This is Walker land," Caleb said. "It's been Walker land since 1963. Karen's jaw twitched. "That doesn't matter. We passed a resolution. You don't have jurisdiction here." The moment held. A wind stirred the trees, whistling through the clearing. Karen lowered the gun just slightly, lips tight. "I'll be filing a claim. Don't touch those logs. I mean it." She turned, boots snapping twigs beneath her as she stormed back to her car. Caleb didn't follow. He didn't raise his voice. But as he stepped back into his truck, he tapped his dashboard twice, then pulled the footage from the dashcam and saved it to a folder named Karan 0. Something told him this wasn't over, and deep in his gut, he knew that woman wasn't bluffing. Caleb Walker didn't expect the sheriff's cruiser to show up before noon. He had just finished unloading the last log from his trailer, stacking it neatly beside the cabin in rows that lined up like ribs. The pine-scented air was peaceful, save for the occasional rustle of a squirrel or a distant bird call. It was the kind of quiet that should have made the work feel rewarding, but the peace snapped like a twig. Under boot, when flashing blue lights crept up the gravel trail, Caleb wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped away from the woodpile. The cruiser stopped just short of the tree line. 2 deputies got out, one older man with a clipboard and a younger woman with a stern expression and a hand already too close to her hip. "Mr. Walker?" the older deputy asked. "That's me," Caleb said, shoulders square. "We got a call about an armed and hostile man with a chainsaw threatening a resident," the deputy continued. Caleb blinked. "What?" The younger officer scanned the clearing, eyes landing on the chainsaw, now resting idle on a stump. Caleb didn't move. "It's not even gassed up." The radio on the older deputy's shoulder squawked, but he turned it down. Caleb pointed to the truck. "There's a dashcam recording from this morning. I didn't threaten anyone, but a woman did walk onto my property uninvited. With a firearm?" The older deputy raised a brow. "You saying she pointed a gun at you?" "No," Caleb said plainly. "She kept it low, didn't aim, but she sure made her intentions loud." The younger deputy looked uneasy. "This woman, have a name, didn't give it? Drove a white Lexus mid-50s, carried a clipboard like it was her badge." They exchanged a look. Caleb could tell they knew exactly who it was. "Karen Lancaster," the older deputy muttered. "She's filed 12 complaints this year, 5 involving chainsaws." The younger deputy let out a breath. "And chickens?" "Chickens?" Caleb asked. "Never mind," the officer replied, suddenly less rigid. Caleb reached into his truck slowly and pulled out a USB stick. Here's the footage. She walked right onto my land, claimed my timber belonged to the HOA, and told me to leave my own property. The older deputy took it but shook his head. Look, Mr. Walker, we're not here to make things worse. But if you can avoid interacting with her, it'd be smart. She's loud, but she knows how to twist a story. She's already contacted the HOA board, the county office, and even someone at zoning enforcement. Caleb leaned against the tailgate. So she makes trouble, and I'm supposed to just let her. No, said the deputy, but don't. Let her pull you into her game. Let the board handle it. Let her throw her tantrum. Caleb stared at the woodpile. That deck was supposed to be my quiet. Now it's a war zone. The younger deputy softened. Just document everything. Trust me, she plays dirty. But the moment she slips, you'll want proof. As the cruiser pulled away, Caleb didn't go back to stacking wood. He went into the cabin, locked the door, and sat at the table with a pen and paper. He began documenting every word of their interaction. Date, time, quotes, license plate, where she stood, what she said. He even drew a rough sketch of the angle her Glock hung at her side. That night, Caleb placed 2 trail cameras in the trees near the clearing, one facing the path from the HOA archway, and another watching the woodpile. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. The next morning, a new email popped into his inbox. The subject line was simple. Notice of violation. HOA fine assessment pending. Caleb opened the file and read slowly. The fine listed unauthorized timber harvesting, disturbance of ecological balance, and disruption of HOA-approved visual continuity. The total? $11.260.00. No signature, no attached policy. Just a link to pay now. Caleb leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The war had officially begun. And the worst part? She hadn't even made her next move yet. 2 days after the fine notice hit Caleb's inbox, a certified envelope arrived at his post office box. The HOA logo was printed in faded green ink, its pine tree emblem barely legible behind the creases from its trip through 3 different rural quarters. He opened it right there in the parking lot, under the same mountain sun that had once brought him peace. Inside was a printed photo of Caleb mid-step, hauling a heavy cedar beam on his shoulder. The photo was grainy, taken from a low angle hidden maybe 50 feet back. Whoever had taken it had done so while crouching in the woods. Behind his cabin, that meant someone had trespassed. The photo was stapled to another violation notice, this time printed on HOA letterhead with legal-sounding words stacked one after another. The total fine had not changed. The letter claimed he had knowingly violated visual corridor preservation, unauthorized material relocation, and community impact statutes. All of it was vague. There was no cited statute number, just references to policy 42B, and once again no signature, no HOA board member names, not even a contact number. That alone told Caleb more than any paragraph in the letter. They didn't want to talk. They wanted him gone. He folded the letter once, shoved it in his jacket pocket, and drove straight to the county clerk's office. It sat in a converted church basement, 3 towns over. The woman at the front desk didn't raise an eyebrow. When he asked for access to HOA records, "You're the 3rd one this month," she said, flipping open a ledger. She slid a manila folder across the counter. Inside were the HOA meeting minutes from the past 6 months. Most were short, typed, in courier font, full of vague language and absent neighbors. Caleb skimmed until he reached a single meeting held 2 days after the sheriff visit. An emergency executive session had been called by Karen Lancaster herself. Only 3 board members were present: Karen, a man named Neil Witherspoon, and someone else signed with just initials. RK. No agenda, no voting process, no prior homeowner notice. The minutes claimed that the HOA had unanimously passed a temporary amendment to policy for 2B, declaring Caleb's section of land, specifically his unapproved wood clearing zone, as a protected aesthetic zone, subject to HOA oversight. That meant they were rewriting their own rules. After the timber was already on his truck, worse still, the minutes stated that future violations will be documented and escalated through enforcement or legal partnerships. Enforcement. That word stayed with him the whole drive home. The HOA wasn't just playing power games anymore. They were rewriting reality, and Karen had built herself a paper army. Caleb pulled up to the cabin and sat in the truck longer than usual, staring at the trees swaying above the roof line. The same trees his father once tied ropes between 2 hang tarps during rainstorms. The same trees his grandfather had planted around the perimeter to block winter winds. Now, those trees had become the border of a war he never asked for. He walked behind the cabin to the woodpile. Something had shifted. A few logs had been nudged. Not rolled, not fallen, moved. The arrangement no longer matched how he had stacked them. It was subtle, but he knew. He could tell from the way the top beam no longer aligned with the pine. Cut beneath it, someone had been here again. He walked a slow circle around the cabin, boots crunching gravel and pine needles. No tire tracks, no footprints. But then, near the fence line where the brush was thicker, he found it half buried in leaves. A broken shoelace, pink, nylon, freshly frayed at the end. He pocketed it. Caleb didn't bother with calls or emails. He walked straight into the cabin, pulled out his trail cam footage, and reviewed the last 48 hours. One video stood out. It was taken at dusk, time-stamped just 24 hours ago. A shadow moved near the edge of the property, close enough to catch the glint of eyeglasses in the fading light. A woman's voice could barely be heard, muttering something about inventory and legal rights. It was Karen. She had come back, and she hadn't come alone. He paused the video and stared at the frame. She had a clipboard in her hand, but it wasn't documents she was after this time. She was counting something the next morning. Caleb stepped out of his cabin with a cup of coffee in hand and paused mid-sip. The logs were gone, the neat rows of timber he had spent hours unloading and stacking had vanished clean silent, like they'd evaporated in the night. No splinters, no drag marks, no leftover bark, just indentations in the dirt and a hollow echo in his gut. He walked the perimeter without a word, following the earth where the wood had once rested. Deep tire tracks cut into the soil like scars, leading away from the back of the property, through a narrow path that hadn't been used in decades and old maintenance trail that fed into a service road near the community garden. The same trail Karen had likely walked 2 nights before, when her voice had whispered about inventory in the trail cam footage. Caleb crouched down near one of the tracks, brushing pine needles aside until he spotted something glinting under the leaves. A small nail dot had been driven into one of his beams. He recognized it by the paterna tiny series of dimples around the edge where his old hammer had slipped. It hadn't fallen by accident. It had bounced off something in motion. His timber had been hauled out illegally quietly while he slept. Caleb didn't panic. He didn't scream. He went inside, set his coffee on the table, and opened the trail cam software. The footage from 2:13 a.m. confirmed. 2 sets of headlights emerged from the woods, one from a dark-colored flatbed truck, the other from a smaller utility vehicle with no plates. The resolution was poor, but the silhouette that stepped into frame was unmistakable. Karen. She wore a reflective vest, hiking boots, and a smug stride as she waved someone forward behind her. A younger man followed, heavy-set, wearing gloves and a beanie. Together, they moved with the kind of precision that only came from preparation. They weren't just trespassing, they had planned it. In the footage, Karen could be seen pointing at specific beams, directing the man to lift carefully. She consulted her clipboard several times. Caleb even caught a low chuckle as she gestured toward the trail camera, then deliberately turned away from it. She knew the camera was there, she just didn't care. Caleb replayed the clip 4 times, before copying it to a separate drive. Then he placed a call not to the sheriff, but to his brother Logan, the state investigator. Logan answered on the second ring. "You only call me when something's about to get ugly," Logan said. "Already did," Caleb replied. "Karen stole the timber, hauled it out with help. I've got the footage." Logan didn't ask for a story. He asked for the footage and a copy of the original land permit. Caleb sent both within the hour. By noon, Logan texted, "Going to need the sale info if it lands anywhere." Caleb knew what that meant. Logan wasn't just looking at theft, he was looking at where the wood ended up. If it had been sold, and if it crossed into another county, it could become a criminal matter beyond HOA boundaries. But Caleb wasn't done yet. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his keys, and drove down to the community park entrance where the HOA had recently started construction on their new welcome grove. It was Karen's pet project, an elaborate plan to plant flower beds and add decorative features that reflected the natural legacy of Eagle Lake. Sure enough, right behind the welcome sign stood a curved stack of cedar logs freshly sanded and arranged in a half-moon display. Caleb walked up and ran his fingers along the grain. He knew every knot, every dent. One log even bore the faint black streak from a lightning-damaged tree he had milled himself. This wasn't just similar timber. It was his. Karen had moved it into public view. She'd stolen it, then used it for decoration, either to prove a point or hide it in plain sight. But she made a mistake. She forgot. Caleb wasn't just a man with a chainsaw. He was a man who remembered everything. As he left the park, Caleb snapped a series of photos, then uploaded them to the same cloud folder where he'd stored the trail cam footage. He labeled them by date and location. And then, for the first time in days, he smiled, because Karen had just moved the battlefield into full view, and now he had the proof to burn her story to the ground. The sun barely crested the mountain ridge when Caleb returned to his cabin with a fresh binder tucked under his arm. Inside were printed stills from the trail cam footage, photos from the community park's log display, and copies of the original land permit signed by both the state and his late father. It was everything he needed. Almost. What he didn't have yet was a sale. He knew Karen hadn't stolen thousands of dollars in timber just to build a decorative display. Not someone like her. No, that display was a decoy, something to quiet the neighbors, while the real haul disappeared into a truck and rolled down into a buyer's yard miles from the mountain. That afternoon, Logan called with an update. "You were right," his brother said, voice clipped, like he was pacing a hallway. "I just got a tip from a contact at the State Wood Registry. Someone submitted a bulk timber sale certificate 2 days ago in Carter County." Caleb sat forward. Under whose name? Lancaster Landscaping Partners. The name hit like a shovel to the chest. Karen doesn't own a landscaping company, Caleb said. She doesn't, Logan agreed. But her cousin Greg does. Greg's name is on the LLC documents. They've operated out of a storage yard off Route 14 for a few years, mostly mulch and decorative boulders. No logging license, no transport permits. So she funneled it through family, Caleb muttered. Logan continued. And get this, they listed the origin of the timber as community-donated stormfall recovery from HOA-designated public land. Caleb laughed once. Hard. There hasn't been a storm up here in 6 months. Logan's voice dropped lower. They're not just stealing anymore. They're falsifying documents. If you hadn't caught her on camera, it might have slipped through. Caleb opened his laptop and added the new information to his case folder. Karen had turned a trespass into a theft, and now into fraud. She wasn't just trying to punish him. She was profiting off it. He clicked through to the HOA's public site. Buried under a new update titled Beautification Project Phase 2. He found a paragraph praising the generous donation of natural timber from a longtime community member. No name was listed, but the tone practically screamed Karen's voice. He printed it. Later that evening, under fading daylight, Caleb returned to the welcome display. It was quieter. No kids playing, no cars parked, just wind and pine needles. He walked the perimeter, photographing the entire structure. It hadn't been secured to the ground, only stacked, temporary, movable, just like evidence should be. As he stepped back toward his truck, he noticed a white sedan parked farther. Up the hill near the mail kiosk, a woman stood beside it, talking into a phone, pacing with fast, sharp steps. It was Karen. She hadn't seen him. Her voice drifted through the trees. I told you, the HOA approved it. Yes, the invoice says Carter County. That's where Greg's yard is. I don't care what Caleb has. It was donation-based. If he files anything, we'll call it a misunderstanding and pin it on an overzealous volunteer. She stopped, turned away, and flicked something into the dirt. Probably a cigarette. Caleb didn't move. He didn't even reach for his phone. He just watched. That night, he forwarded the trail cam footage, sale document, HOA bulletin post, and park photos to Logan with the subject line, "Here's your overzealous volunteer." By the time morning rolled in, Logan had already called in a formal request with the State Forestry Bureau to verify the timber's origin. If the wood was confirmed as part of Caleb's stewardship, permittant, if Karen had resold it through falsified records, it wouldn't be an HOA violation anymore. It would be felony fraud. Caleb sat on his cabin porch, sipping coffee as the mountain turned golden. The logs were still gone, the land still scarred, but something had shifted. Karen had stopped hiding. She thought she had buried her scheme under HOA jargon, family names, and decorative bark chips. She hadn't counted on one thing. The man she stole from wasn't just a cabin owner. He was a steward of federal land, and the government was about to notice. 3 days passed in silence. No new letters from the HOA, no fresh finds, no midnight visitors poking around the tree line. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel right, the type that settles in just before a storm rolls over the ridge. Caleb spent the time documenting. He printed every email, copied every video, and filled an old red binder with a sequence of events so detailed it could be mistaken for a prosecutor's trial book. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in being ready. Logan called the following Tuesday. His voice didn't waste time. They're sending someone up. You'll get a visit. Caleb leaned against the porch post. Who's they? Federa, Forestry Compliance, and the Department of Natural Resources. Joint team. They're treating it like a timber fraud case now, especially since that landscaping sale crossed county lines and listed false origin data. Caleb didn't speak for a moment. You're telling me she didn't just steal wood? She stole federal property? Technically, yes, Logan said, because your family signed on to the federal stewardship program 15 years ago. That timber was under federal oversight. Selling it, moving it, or misreporting it without permission. That makes it a federal offense. Caleb stared out at the place where the woodpile had been. The dirt was still scarred from the tire tracks. The grass hadn't started to grow back. Yet it looked like the ground itself was holding a grudge. What's next? He asked. They're going to inspect both sites, your land and the landscaping yard. They want photos, tags, growth rings, anything that can trace the logs. You think Karen even knows what a growth ring is? Logan didn't laugh. Doesn't matter. They're bringing a field tech who does. The next morning, 2 unmarked trucks pulled into Caleb's drive. Out stepped 3 people in khakis and windbreakers, clipboards in hand. The woman in charge introduced herself as Special Agent Briggs, Forestry Division. They spent 2 hours walking the perimeter, noting boundary markers, taking soil samples, and recording details from Caleb's permits. He showed them everything, where the trees were cut, where the logs were stacked, even the original pile site that had been stripped overnight. By the time they left, Briggs said just 5 words. You did everything by the book. That evening, Logan called again. We got a hit. One of the logs at Greg's lot still had your family's old property stamp on the end. Grain. It was covered in dust. But when they cleaned it, clear as day. Your grandfather's initials, burnt in with a welding rod. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not pride. Not even relief. just confirmation that he hadn't been losing his mind. Karen hadn't made a mistake. She had made a felony, Logan continued. The feds seized about 30 beams from the yard. The rest were either sanded down or sold, but they're running that trail too. Greg's playing dumb. Karen hasn't answered calls. Her lawyer issued a statement saying she was simply following HOA protocol. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And what does HOA protocol say about midnight timber theft? Apparently it says to blame the cousin, Logan said, but things were unraveling fast. The field team issued a freeze order on the landscaping project in Eagle Lake. The timber display behind the welcome sign was dismantled and removed pending verification. Residents began to whisper. Some even stopped Karen in the grocery store, asking why men in khakis had started combing through her cousin's business yard. She gave the same line over and over. It was a donation, a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. At the next HOA meeting, which Karen didn't attend, a small group of residents questioned whether the emergency session she had called to find Caleb had ever been legal. One board member admitted he hadn't even been present. Another quit mid-meeting. Caleb stayed home, chopping wood with the sound of crows echoing above. The binder on his table had grown thick now, over 60 pages of dates, photos, audio clips, and legal documents. It wasn't vengeance. It was evidence. As the sun set, Logan sent one final message. Federal counsel wants a statement from you. Karen's facing 3 counts: theft, misrepresentation of land assets, and interstate fraud. Caleb set the phone down and looked out into the trees, the same trees his grandfather once protected. The same trees Karen thought she could claim with a clipboard and a smug tone. She hadn't counted on this. She hadn't counted on someone like Caleb. By the time federal agents began their formal investigation, most of the Eagle Lake community had gone quiet. Neighbors who once waved in passing now crossed streets to avoid being seen with Karen. HOA meetings were canceled twice in a row. The bulletin board near the clubhouse remained empty, except for a single, anonymous flyer stapled dead center. Who's next on her list? Caleb had kept his head down through most of it. He didn't need gossip or attention. But there was still one thing he hadn't told anyone, not even Logan, buried deep in his filing cabinet. Wrapped in a faded envelope marked in his father's blocky handwriting, sat a yellowed piece of paper with a rusted staple in the top left corner. It was a federal land stewardship addendum, signed in 1997 by both the Department of Forestry and the Bureau of Conservation. The addendum didn't just authorize selective harvesting for forest health, it granted the Walker family exclusive rights to oversee and manage a historical forestry preservation zone. In short, Caleb's family wasn't just part of a conservation program, they were custodians of a federal trust. Karen hadn't just stolen wood, she'd stolen from a protected federal landholding, with decades of verified lineage and conservation history tied to Caleb's name. That document was never entered into the HOA's records because it wasn't part of their jurisdiction, and Karen, for all her self-righteous lectures and fine print tricks, had no idea it even existed. Caleb scanned the paper, saved it as a digital copy, and sent it directly to Logan with one line, "Thought this might help." 3 hours later, Logan was standing on Caleb's porch, holding a folder and wearing the kind of expression that meant something serious had shifted. "This changes everything," he said without sitting down. "That permanence doesn't just prove ownership, it proves oversight. Karen didn't just interfere with your rights. She interfered with a federal custodian's authority. That's a whole new tier of violation." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "So what happens now?" "They're bumping the charges," Logan said. "Karen's facing felony theft of federal property, fraudulent misrepresentation, and obstruction of land stewardship, and Greg's company. They're under review for knowingly accepting illegal resources." The news spread like wildfire. The very next day, a notice appeared at the entrance to the neighborhood, posted not by the HOA, but by the Department of Forestry. "Timber under federal investigation. Property access restricted. HOA jurisdiction. Suspended pending review." Karen's Lexus sat in her driveway all day with the windows rolled up and the curtains pulled tight. No HOA emails came, no announcements, no clipboard walk-throughs. Instead, that evening, she did something no one expected. She showed up at Caleb's cabin. She didn't knock, she just stood at the edge of his clearing, holding a folder in one hand and her purse in the other, lips pressed tight like she was chewing gravel. Caleb met her halfway. "You think this is funny?" she said, voice barely holding together. "You're destroying my reputation over a few logs. I was protecting the community. You know that?" "No," Caleb said calmly. "You were protecting yourself from accountability." Her eyes narrowed. "You could have just ignored the fine. You could have stayed off my land," he replied. Karen stepped closer, trying to regain footing. "The HOA is going to come after you for this. You think they'll let you make us look like criminals? You did that all by yourself," he said. "And the HOA is already unraveling." She opened the folder and held out a printout. "This shows the lumber was delivered to community space. That makes it ours." He didn't even glance at it. "That display, it's gone, seized, tagged, officially part of a federal investigation. That what has a federal stamp. My grandfather burned it in himself. You stole more than property, Karen. You stole a legacy. For once, Karen didn't have a comeback. Just silence. A long, hollow silence that stretched into the woods around them like fog. Then she turned and left. She didn't look back. That night, Caleb sat on his porch under a sky full of stars. The same porch where his father used to sit and carve initials into the railings. Tomorrow, the agents would return. But tonight, the mountain was quiet. And for the first time in weeks, the silence felt right. It started quietly, a folded letter taped to the HOA bulletin board. No HOA stamp, no Karen-style monogram, just 4 lines typed on plain white paper. Effective. Immediately, Karen Lancaster is suspended from the HOA board pending legal proceedings. A community vote on interim leadership will follow. No signature, no explanation, but the message rang through Eagle Lake like a cracked church bell. By noon, it had been photographed, posted online, and whispered through every cul-de-sac and mailbox station. Residents who'd once tiptoed around Karen now swapped. Stories on porches and in driveways, all with the same ending. She finally went too far. 2 days later, federal agents returned to the community. Not in secret, not with clipboards, but with marked vans and a mobile forestry lab. They interviewed neighbors, measured wood stacks, and took samples from the remaining beams at Greg's yard. A portable scanner matched growth rings from the logs at the park to the same cross-cut samples Caleb had stored in his barn. The agents confirmed it all. Same origin, same species, same scar pattern from a blight that hit only Caleb's parcel 5 years earlier. The evidence was ironclad. Karen was finished. Greg's yard was shut down. His license revoked. But Karen's reckoning came not with sirens or headlines. It came with a letter, hand-delivered by the Forestry Bureau, naming Caleb as the sole designated steward of a protected federal timber reserve, with rights to enforce legal boundaries against any HOA that attempted further interference. It was more than a win. It was recognition. A week later, Caleb stood quietly behind a folding table at the emergency HOA meeting, invited only because the board, now led by interim president Clara Dumont, wanted his input on future community relations with adjacent landowners. He said only one thing. "I'm not interested in controlling the HOA," he said. "I just want you to leave the mountain the way you found it." Clara nodded. No one argued that. At the back of the room, Karen sat alone in the final row, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. The woman who once barked orders across driveways and waved violation slips like law, now stared at the floor. She didn't speak. She didn't raise her hand. She just faded. The next day, her Lexus disappeared from the driveway. A for sale by owner sign followed. Word spread she was moving to be closer to her sister, though no one asked which direction that was. Caleb didn't celebrate. He didn't host a barbecue or post about it online. Instead, he drove back up to the cabin with 2 new cedar beams tied to the bed of his truck. He laid the first beam with quiet precision, sanding the end before lining it up with the others. Then he lifted a branding iron from the fire pit, heated it until it glowed, and burned 3 initials into the fresh wood. HW, his grandfather, then next to it, CW, his father, then finally, CJW, Caleb James Walker. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it because some legacies are carved, not declared. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, Caleb had finished the new porch. The logs were sanded smooth, sealed with resin, and finally, peacefully in place. That night, he sat with a thermos of coffee and watched the stars burn above the treetops. Somewhere down the mountain, a town turned the page on its loudest chapter. The HOA would rebuild. New board members would rise, and fences would be mended, maybe even literally. But up here, the mountain had spoken. It didn't raise its voice. It didn't hold a clipboard. It simply remembered. And so did Caleb. Because the mountain didn't forget who protected it.